I knew the moment that car rolled into my garage that it didn't belong to retirement. Some cars arrived tired. Some arrived broken. That one arrived alert, like it was still on duty, watching everything around it. A black Crown Victoria, former police interceptor. Engine idling low, steady, disciplined. The rain outside tapped softly on the roof of the shop. And for a few seconds, the driver didn't get out. I've learned that silence inside a car usually means the noise inside a person is too loud. When he finally stepped out, his movements were controlled, almost rehearsed. No small talk, no explanations. He just said he needed me to look at it, not fix it, not restore it. Just look. I've been a mechanic for over 40 years, and I don't just hear engines anymore. I hear pauses, hesitations, the way someone avoids eye contact when a car means more than steel and rubber. The Crown Vic had been sitting for a while. Tires unevenly worn, interior clean but untouched, like a room no one wanted to enter. It wasn't neglect, it was avoidance. As I lifted the hood, I felt him watching me the same way people watch doctors read an x-ray, afraid of what might be said out loud. The engine was strong. The problems were small, too small for a car that had been parked for years. I ran the VIN out of habit. That's when things stopped being routine. The records showed early decommissioning, not age, not budget cuts, a sudden pull from service. Those don't happen often. When they do, they usually come with stories no one wants repeated. I looked back at him and said it used to be a patrol car. He didn't react, just nodded, slow, like he was agreeing with something he'd already accepted long ago. Then he said something that stayed with me. He said the car never failed him. People did. Or maybe he meant he failed them. Sometimes even the speaker doesn't know which one hurts more. Over the next few days, he kept coming back, not to check progress, to sit. He'd stand near the car, hands in his pockets, eyes fixed on the dashboard like it might speak back. Every time I told him the repairs were almost done, he found a reason to wait. One more adjustment, one more check. I realized then that fixing the car wasn't the problem. Letting it go was. That Crown Victoria wasn't just metal. It was the last place where his life still made sense, where the rules were clear and the mirror didn't ask questions. On the fourth day, he finally talked. Not all at once, just pieces. He used to wear a badge. He used to believe in right timing and good instincts. One night, a call came in fast. No backup nearby. He made a decision in seconds that would later be dissected for months. No one died. No shots fired. But procedure was broken. Trust cracked. Reports didn't line up the way they were supposed to. The department didn't need a villain. They needed distance. He handed in his badge before they could take it. The job ended. The marriage followed. And the car became the only place where he didn't feel like a mistake. When I turned the key after the final repair, the engine responded instantly, clean and confident. I watched his shoulders tense, then relax, like hearing an old voice you thought was gone forever. He didn't smile, not yet. He just closed his eyes for a second, breathing through something heavy. That's when I understood. This wasn't about driving again. This was about deciding whether the past still owned him. And that decision was harder than any mechanical fix I'd ever done. He stayed longer that evening, longer than the car needed. I kept working, letting the silence do what it always does when people are close to saying something important. The rain had stopped, but the air still felt heavy, like the garage itself was holding its breath. He ran his hand across the hood, slow and deliberate, the way someone touches something they're afraid to damage just by remembering. He said he used to sit in that driver's seat after long shifts, engine running, radio off, just listening to the car cool down while he decided who he was supposed to be when he got home. The Crown Victoria had been his buffer between the street and real life. Without it, everything rushed in at once. He told me the mistake wasn't dramatic. That's what made it unbearable. No chase, no headline, just a moment where instinct overruled protocol. He trusted his gut when he should have waited. The internal review didn't call it reckless, but it didn't call it right either. Gray areas destroy people faster than guilt does. He He said the worst part wasn't losing the job. It was realizing that the man he thought he was only existed inside that car, under those lights, with a radio telling him what to do next. When that voice went silent, he had nothing to replace it. The marriage didn't collapse in one fight. It eroded. Late nights turned into separate dinners. Conversations became reports instead of feelings. He stopped talking because explaining himself always sounded like excuses, even when he wasn't making any. She didn't leave in anger. She left tired. He said watching her pack felt worse than the disciplinary meeting because there was no appeal process, no chance to explain intent. The Crown Vic stayed parked in the driveway after that, like a guard dog with no house left to protect. As he spoke, I noticed how often he referred to the car as we. We responded fast. We handled worse calls than that. We got people home. That's when I realized he never separated himself from the machine. To him, the car wasn't a tool. It was proof that he had mattered. I told him something I rarely say out loud. Cars remember how they were treated, but they also remember when they're forgiven. He looked at me like he wasn't sure that applied to people. That night, he asked me to sit inside with him, just for a minute. The interior still smelled faintly of disinfectant and old vinyl. When he turned the key, the dashboard lit up, steady and familiar. He didn't move, just listen. He said this sound used to calm him, remind him that no matter how chaotic things got, there was a system holding everything together. I watched his reflection in the windshield, older, quieter, but not broken, not completely. When he finally shut the engine off, the silence didn't feel empty anymore. It felt earned. He told me he wasn't sure he wanted the car back yet, not because he didn't love it, but because taking it meant admitting that the chapter was over. I told him something else then. A car doesn't need a badge to move forward. It just needs a destination. He nodded slowly, like that idea was settling somewhere deep, somewhere painful but necessary. As he left the garage that night, he turned back once not to look at the car but at me. He asked if I thought people could rebuild themselves the way cars do, not back to factory condition, but into something that still runs, still matters. I didn't answer right away, because the truth is that answer doesn't come from mechanics. It comes from the road ahead, and his was just starting to open. The next morning, he came back earlier than usual. No hesitation this time. He walked straight toward the Crown Victoria like someone who had made a decision during the night and didn't want to give himself time to undo it. He said he'd been awake since before sunrise, sitting at his kitchen table, staring at his keys, realizing he hadn't driven the car in over a year. Not because it wouldn't start, because he didn't know where to go if he did. When a man loses direction, even a full tank feels useless. He asked me to take the first drive with him. I don't usually do that, but I could see this wasn't about testing brakes or listening for noises. It was about proving something to himself. When we pulled out of the garage, the street looked different, like it always does when you leave a place where you've been hiding. The Crown Vic moved smoothly, steady, familiar, but lighter somehow. Less like a patrol unit and more like a car that belonged to a person again. As we drove, he talked about how, after leaving the force, he tried to be invisible. Different job, different routine. No uniforms, no radios, no structure. People told him he was lucky, that he got out before things got worse. They didn't understand that for him. Worse had already happened. He said the hardest part was not being needed. On the street, someone always needed him. At home, he didn't know how to be present without being in control. We stopped at a red light, and he went quiet. A beat too long. He admitted there were nights he'd sit in the parked car, hands on the wheel, imagining calls that would never come. Not because he wanted danger, but because he wanted purpose. He said losing the badge made him feel like his instincts were now something to be ashamed of, instead of trusted. That's a hard thing to carry. When the light turned green, he exhaled like he'd been holding that breath for years. I told him that machines don't judge function by labels. An engine doesn't care if it's in a police car or a family sedan. It just does what it was built to do. The Crown Victoria responded as if it agreed, accelerating smoothly, confidently. For the first time since I'd met him, he smiled. Not a wide one, a small, surprised one, like he'd just discovered something he thought was gone forever. When we returned to the shop, he didn't shut the car off right away. He looked around the cabin, touching the dash, the door, the seat. Not with nostalgia, but with gratitude. He said he realized something on that drive. The car wasn't holding him back. He was using it as an anchor because moving forward felt like betrayal. Betrayal of who he had been. But staying stuck was slowly erasing who he still could be. He asked if I thought changing the car's purpose would change how it felt. I said cars adapt better than people think. They don't cling to what they used to be. They respond to what they're asked to do now. He laughed softly at that. A real laugh this time. The kind that catches you off guard. He said maybe it was time the Crown Vic stopped chasing ghosts and started carrying something real again. Before leaving, he asked me to remove the last thing that tied it to the department. The spotlight. It still worked, but it didn't belong anymore. When I unbolted it, the car looked different. Not weaker, just free. He watched closely, eyes wet but steady. When I handed him the part, he didn't take it. He told me to keep it. Some things are better left behind. As he drove away alone this time, I noticed something I hadn't before. The car didn't sound like it was on duty. It sounded like it was going home. A few days passed before I heard from him again. In this line of work, silence usually means one of two things. Either the car is running fine, or the person needed distance to let something settle. I didn't rush it. Stories, like engines, need time to cool before you touch them again. Then one afternoon, just before closing, the Crown Victoria came back, but it didn't arrive the same way it had before. This time, it rolled in calmly, no hesitation at the entrance, no engine left running like a shield. He parked it, turned the key off immediately, and stepped out with a posture that felt lighter, like he'd finally put something down. He told me he'd been driving every morning since that first ride. No destination at first, just movement. Then one day, he took a longer road without realizing it and ended up near the old precinct. He didn't stop. He didn't slow down. He just noticed that his chest didn't tighten the way it used to. That's how you know something inside has shifted. Not when the memories disappear, but when they stop controlling the steering. He said the car felt different now. Not quieter, not faster. Just honest. Like it wasn't pretending to be something it wasn't anymore. He started using it for normal things. Groceries, coffee runs, picking up his nephew from school. The first time a kid climbed into the back seat and laughed instead of sitting in silence. He had to pull over for a minute. He realized the car had carried fear for so long that it deserved to carry joy too. We talked about how people think healing comes from big moments, dramatic closures, final conversations. But most of the time, it comes from repetition, from doing ordinary things until they stop feeling impossible. He said every mile helped rewrite what the car meant to him. It wasn't the place where he lost everything anymore. It was a place where he started rebuilding. Before leaving, he asked if I thought he should sell it. Start completely fresh. I told him that sometimes starting fresh doesn't mean starting over. Sometimes it means staying and choosing differently. The Crown Vic wasn't a reminder of failure anymore. It was proof that he survived it. He nodded slowly, like he already knew the answer, but needed permission to accept it. As he opened the door to leave, he paused and looked back at the car one more time. Not with longing, with respect. He said something I won't forget. He said that for a long time, he thought the car was stuck in the past. Turns out, it was waiting for him to catch up. When the engine started again, it sounded steady, confident, like something that had finally found its role without needing to announce it. He drove away at a normal speed. No urgency, no avoidance, just forward. And I stood there thinking about how many cars pass through my hands carrying people who think they're broken beyond repair, when all they really need is permission to move on without erasing who they were. I didn't expect to see him again after that. Most people leave once the car is done and the weight is lighter. But weeks later, the Crown Victoria returned one last time. Not for a problem, not for an adjustment. He came to say goodbye, not to me, but to the version of himself that had been living inside that car for too long. He told me he'd accepted a new job. Nothing flashy. Training drivers for emergency response. Teaching judgment instead of reaction. Calm instead of speed. He said it felt right, like all the things that had once defined him finally had somewhere to go. He stood there for a moment, looking at the car under the shop lights, and admitted something quietly. He used to believe that the worst day of his life was the one that ended his career. Now he understood it was the day he stopped believing he could still be useful. The Crown Vic didn't represent authority anymore. It represented survival, proof that something could go through chaos, lose its identity, and still come out dependable on the other side. Before leaving, he handed me the keys and asked me to take it for a short drive after he left. Not to test it, to listen. I did. The engine sounded settled, not tense, not waiting for commands. Just ready. When I parked it again, I realized something I've learned too many times to ignore. Cars don't need closure. People do. And sometimes a car becomes the safest place to find it. He drove off for the final time without looking back. That's how you know the story has reached its end. Not when someone clings, but when they trust the road ahead enough to keep their eyes forward. The garage felt quieter after that. Not empty. Peaceful. Another story carried away on four wheels. No longer heavy. No longer unresolved. That's why I do this work. Not because I fix cars, but because sometimes if you listen closely enough, you get to watch someone repair themselves in the process. And if this story meant something to you, if you've ever felt stuck in a chapter that didn't end the way you expected, there are more cars like this. More stories waiting to be told. Subscribe to the channel. Stay with me in this garage. Because every car that rolls in here remembers something. And sometimes hearing those stories helps us remember who we still can be.